Hello, I'm Gary Ford, Managing Director of Tiger Hobbies Limited, UK hobby imports and distributors, and welcome to episode 4 of the end of the war in Europe. 1942 was a period of consolidation and defence for the Red Army. They inflicted in January 1942 the Wehrmacht's first major land defeat of World War II, when they pushed the Germans back 50 miles to secure Moscow. Further north, the siege of Stalingrad was in its first year and would last until January 1944 and cost over 1 million deaths in the city. In the spring and summer of 1942, the Germans were back on the offensive, mainly in the south, pushing towards the Caucasus and the oil fields, but were distracted by a city called Stalingrad. The Battle of Stalingrad raged from the summer of 1942 to January 1943 and is accepted as the most vicious battle in history. The absolute clash of ideology between the German fascists and the Soviet communists. Most of the city is located on the west or right bank of the Volga, and after some months of vicious fighting, the German 6th Army captured most of the city and were actually almost on the Volga. The Red Army had 2 small strips of land near the Volga and were holding on by their fingertips. So the Red Army pushed the 13th Guards Rifle Division across the Volga under intense German fire and air attacks. This was shown in the movie Enemy at the Gate, which I am showing a clip of the crossing of the Volga. General Zhukov intelligence showed the Germans and their allies, Italians, Hungarians and Romanians, were weak on the northern and southern flanks of the city. So the Red Army launched Operation Uranus in November of 1942, and the German fate was sealed as Stalingrad was cut off by the end of November 1942. Stalingrad resulted in close to 3 million casualties and over 1 million dead, split between both sides, even more than the Battle of Verdun in World War I. The Germans lost close to 100,000 prisoners of war in Stalingrad itself. This went up to 200,000 after the Red Army attacks under Operation Uranus. The first massive nails were going right down onto the Nazi coffin. In 1943, the Red Army was building up with new equipment, much of it from the United States, including Shermans, but it was trucks that the Red Army wanted and needed. The Russian ones were quite poor. The USA supplied 400,000 trucks and jeeps, and here I've got a 135th model of the Studebaker. This truck was similar to the US Army GMC, but almost all the production went to the Red Army. It was the summer of 1943 near the city of Kursk that one of the largest battles took place, resulting in the largest tank battle in history. The Germans would attack a massive salient in the lines by attacking from the north and the south of the salient in a form of a pincer movement. The British had been supplying intelligence to the Soviets, and at the time of the attack, we told the Soviets that we had spies everywhere in Hitler's command system. What we did not tell them was the intelligence was ultra intelligence gleaned from Bletchley Park, and at the time, absolutely top secret. But this gave the Red Army time to prepare defence in depth and wait for the German attack, Operation Citadel. The Germans would attack with a massive army, 1 million men, and 3,000 tanks, many of them the latest types, Panthers, Tigers, Ferdinand, tank destroyers of course, and the latest version of the venerable Panzer Mark IV and Stug 3 assault guns. The trouble was the Red Army was waiting for them with 2 million men, 5,000 tanks, 25,000 guns, and this would go up to 7,000 tanks and 46,000 guns and mortars in the counterattack. In the attack, a 3-to-1 advantage is helpful, not a 2-to-1 disadvantage with the enemy waiting for you to come over the hill. The Germans' attack started on the 4th of July and made reasonable progress, especially on the southern pincer, but were struggling on the northern pincer. General Zhukov was again in supreme command, and by the 6th of July 1944 was ordering the first massive counterattacks, and the Germans were already within days fighting a defensive battle. German Tiger tanks knocked out hundreds of Red Army tanks such as the T-34 and KV-1 under command of tank aces like Michael Whitman. But no matter how many Russian tanks were knocked out, more and more were coming. Next to me, just here, are 2 massive 16th scale models, one of the famous German Tiger and the other one of the T-34-76, or in this case it's T-34-85. But we have these also in 72nd scale, and we've got versions in the popular 1/35th scale as well. Around the 12th of July, around the town of Prokhorovka, there would be what was described as the largest tank battle in history in a condensed area between the German 2nd SS Panzer Corps and the Soviet 5th Guards Tank Army. Over 1,000 tanks and assault guns would slog it out on the 12th of July 1944. It was actually a mini German victory within this massive battle, as the Germans knocked loads of Soviet tanks out. I think over 350 Red Army tanks and assault guns were knocked out for a loss of about 70 German vehicles. But they failed to get to their objective, and in the bigger picture they were losing the Battle of Kursk. Stalin wanted the commander of the 5th Guards Tank Army sacked for such massive losses in a small area. But Zhukov persuaded him not to do it, as it was only a small part of the battle, and in the bigger picture the Germans were stopped, even if it was at high cost. Operation Citadel was ended by Hitler on the 12th of July, but continued to the 17th of July when the 2nd SS Panzer Corps was ordered to stop operations in the area. Kursk would cost about 200,000 German casualties and 800,000 Soviet casualties, but the Soviets could replace them. All the lost tanks, lost soldiers, the lot. The Germans could not easily do this, and this really was the turning point of World War II and the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. They gambled and they lost, and the hammer really was coming whacking down onto the nails in the Nazi coffin. The Red Army launched two massive offensives to increase their salient, one north of the salient and one to the south of the salient. In the north, it was fairly successful against weaker German formations. But in the south, where the Germans had been more successful themselves in Citadel, they faced stronger German units and suffered massive tank and personnel losses. But were at the door of the city of Kharkov, or now Kharkiv, by the 12th of August 1943. The Battle of Kursk saw two major developments. First, the Germans were losing superiority in the air, and for the first time, the Soviet Air Force was getting the upper hand with newer types such as this aircraft over here, the Sturmovik ground attack aircraft, and better fighters to give top cover. Development of ground attack aircraft on both sides would come into this battle, and in fact new aircraft such as the Henschel HS-129 and the Stuka Ju-87G cannon vehicle, with pilots like Rudel knocking out masses of Soviet tanks and vehicles. 80% of the German army was on the Eastern Front, but only 25% of its fighter aircraft, and most were trying to stop the US and British bombers knocking the crap out of the Third Reich. The other major development was the two leaders. Hitler, after Kursk, started to interfere heavily on the day-to-day running of the military and constantly overruled his generals. Stalin, on the other hand, woke up to the fact that he got some outstanding generals, such as Zhukov and Konev and the like, and started to trust them to win the war. In fact, we shall take time to look at possibly the most effective army commander of World War II, General and later Marshal Georgy Zhukov, a complex officer, sometimes referred to as Stalin's butcher, due to his indifference to his soldiers' lives. Like many of the best German and Soviet generals, they were basically repugnant individuals. Born in 1896 into the world of the poor peasant, he managed to get just 3 years of schooling before becoming an apprentice in Moscow. He became self-educated and completed that apprenticeship in 1914, just as World War I started. He was conscripted into the Imperial Army as a cavalry trooper and was awarded the Cross of St. George twice for bravery. He was promoted to sergeant and joined the Bolsheviks during the 1917 revolution. He fought in the Russian Civil War and again impressed his superiors with bravery and military instincts. He was commissioned into the cavalry in 1920 and was awarded the Red Banner for helping put down rebellions in 1921. Also in the 1920s, he attended the German military schools, and he'd already learnt German before World War I. He rose quickly through the ranks, and by the early 1930s was a Red Army cavalry divisional commander, and by the late 1930s he was an army commander. and in the brief but bloody Soviet-Japanese War of 1938 to 1939. During the Battle of, I think it's Khalkhin Gol, he launched what appeared to be massive frontal attacks, and he used tanks on the flanks in the form of a massive pincer movement, almost cavalry tactics. This was backed up by ground attack aircraft used by the Soviet forces for the very first time and mass artillery, resulting in decisive victory, sending the Japanese scuttling back to their Manchurian territories. Zhukov would use these tactics against the Germans on a number of occasions, after he also recommended the use of diesel in tank engines, as the BT-5 tank used in this campaign had got petrol engines and was prone to fire. The later T-34 and KV-1s had effective and powerful diesel engines. As mentioned earlier, Zhukov survived the terror of the Stalin's purges due to the fact he was on operational service and luckily for the Soviet Union. Now we have looked at the very top of the Red Army, we shall now look at the very bottom of the Red Army, the ordinary Red Army infantryman or rifleman, often referred to as frontovik, or soldier on the front line. He was generally armed with the Mossad Nagant model 1891/30 bolt-action rifle that the early version had served the Russians from the Russo-Japanese War in the early 19th century through the Great War. In fact, some are still being used by some Russian rear troops in the battles in Ukraine as we speak. The use of effective oil kept this rifle working even in the coldest conditions where German weapons would often freeze. Life of a Soviet army soldier was possibly the toughest of any major power in the World War II. He was poorly trained, poorly paid, given very few rations, the worst medical care of any army, subject to the most brutal discipline and political indoctrination by political officers or commissars. Leave, well, that was almost non-existent, and there was very, very little in the way of entertainment. Maybe a patriotic film, or someone knocking a few tunes out on the old balalaika. The chance of returning home after the war was very slim for the frontovik. 8 to 10 million were killed in combat. A further 6 million were captured by the Germans, with at least 3.5 million being killed by the Germans in captivity, who did not recognise them as humans. They were total Untermensches. In 1941, a Soviet war correspondent, Konstantin Simonov, wrote a poem to his girlfriend called "Wait for Me." This was published in Pravda in 1942 and became one of the most read poems of World War II. Millions of Red Army frontoviks, soldiers, carried it in their uniform, along with a picture of their wives, girlfriend and family. I will read this for you. Due to translation, there are a number of versions. This is the one from the World at War TV series, and originally read by Sir Laurence Olivier, who narrated the TV series. Wait for me, and I'll return. Only wait very hard. Wait when you are filled with sorrow, as you watch the yellow rain. Wait when the wind sweeps the snowdrift. Wait in the sweltering heat. Wait when others have stopped waiting and forgetting their yesterdays. Wait even when from afar, when no letters come to you. Wait even when others are tired of waiting. Wait even when my mother and son think I am no more. And when friends sit around the fire drinking to my memory. Wait and do not hurry to drink to my memory too. Wait, for I'll return, defying every death. And those who do not wait say that I was lucky. They will never understand that in the midst of death, you with your waiting saved me. Only you and I will know how I survived, because you were waiting as no one else did. In episode 5, we shall look at 1944 and the Red Army's massive offensive to clear every German out of the Soviet Union, Operation Bagration, or Bagration as it's called.